the bobject, a tank not even its own nation could love. But today's video is going to showcase why this thing is so broken, and of course we're going to be having a look at 2 replays within this video showcasing why this tank is so broken. So the bobject has one of the most broken armor models in that most people cannot pen the front of this thing even in this lower plate, or at least somewhat of a lower plate, and even the cupola is very difficult to be able to hit, especially when this thing is moving at 50 kilometers an hour, because why not make this thing super fast as well as being able to not actually be able to be penned frontally. So without further ado, we're in the town in Highway. So, setting up an early position with the bobject is vital, because what you can do when you are pre-aimed, when you're ready, is you can set 50 TPs on fire easily. And the tier 9 heavy, of course, did not want to receive that hit, especially considering that a typical bobject hit will hit you for only 650 alpha damage, but reloads super fast as well. So not only are you going to be hitting people reliably using the lower alpha damage gun than something like a T110E4, which relies upon the higher alpha, but the bobject also is then able to be mobile enough to reposition itself to get it in the fight continuously. And that's what you want from your tank destroyers in World of Tanks, is to not only have the armor but also have the gun and also have the kind of DPM to really kick it out and play against people like the Badger, which just is not going to stand a chance really, considering the fact that you're seeing him hide the cupola here against the Badger, because it's a very slim shot for him to be able to hit. Now, what you've noticed there is that the Badger bounces off of this vehicle, as most tanks in the game probably do. Now, when you have balls of steel, like the bobject pretty much does, you can poke out against various different tanks. Now, I'm not saying that you should be poking out against Jaegeroos or anything like that, because it can get dangerous. But what you can do is, if you're playing up against things like IS-7s, TNHs, they are going to struggle to be able to easily pen you without fully aiming, and when you're not giving them the chance because you're moving so quickly. So, as we've mentioned, the bobject now gets into a different position, and he bounces around from the T110E3 on the enemy team, who preemptively fired at the bobject, and unfortunately for the T110E3, he didn't manage to penetrate. Whereas you're seeing the bobject being able to penetrate the IS-7, his teammate there, very easily, and by the time he reloads, potentially the IS-7 will pull back to be able to get him another shell. But it's got to be careful from the left and right, because in the town, of course, you're not a turreted tank destroyer, so you can get caught out sometimes, and especially if you get tracked and retracked, it becomes very apparent that maybe the bobject isn't as broken as it is from the front when you start getting hit from the rear. So it's something you always have to remember, and of course from above it's always as toxic as usual. So the Object 777 manages to catch the glimpse of the side armor there and hence penetrates, but unfortunately for the Object, it's now very much a bad idea for the 777, because what he now has to deal with is a bobject that is just waiting to fully reload every single time. He's going to be ploughing rounds into him. There's nothing that the Object 777 can really do, and with the second consecutive fire on another heavy tank on the enemy team, it feels almost bad for the enemy team. It seems like the arsonist here in the bobject is being a pain in the backside, and a pain in the backside he definitely was for the 777. Now the Stritzval manages to pen, and I'm not actually sure where he penned him there, maybe in the very lower plate, which was kind of lucky considering that was very low, wasn't aimed, but I'm sure the player playing was a little bit triggered with that one. But regardless, 4,056 damage has been done and 2,500 has been blocked, as you can expect from a tank that has the frontal armour that this one does. Now, one thing that you should note about the Object is that sometimes it kind of gets annoying to play, because of course when you're not a turreted TD and you have the gun arc that this thing does, it doesn't have the best gun arc. No one's going to be saying that it does. It can be a bit difficult to kind of pull around corners, and you're seeing here it's very difficult to get shots on tanks like the Badger. Even though the Badger is a non-turreted tank as well, it's kind of one of those things where you've just got to duke it out and see who fires first, and then hope that your DPM is better than theirs. But you can see here another shell that you couldn't quite hit because of the gun arc, And of course the Strict Farm, the one that actually penned him earlier and actually one of the only tanks on the enemy team to be able to pen him, does decide to go through this central area. So at this point, Object 268 has two choices. He can either deal with the T110E3, who's going to be a bit more of a threat than the STRV, who's just been shut down by his teammates, and of course that automatically means that he goes for the T110E3, but you know, in those sort of scenarios you've got to choose the high priority target, who is going to most likely pen you and who is going to be the most annoying if you don't manage to take them out quick enough. And of course the STRV, being the faster tank, could have definitely got around behind the bobject and could have been a real pain in the backside, so you've always got to line these things up when playing. So Emon here decides that because the enemy team have progressed on the kind of western side of the map and they look like they're going to be progressing towards the Foch on his team who's on his own, it's very much imperative that he gets into a position to start dealing damage as they progress. So as we've always expected from this vehicle and having the mobility, he uses it to great effect within this game, having moved from the town area all the way back to spawn and in support of the Foch on his team. Now this is a fairly risky manoeuvre because you never know if this T95 is going to be able to get a nice crossfire into you, but at this point the balls deep factor of the Object 268 version 4 decides he's just going, and it doesn't matter who's going to be in front of him, and hopefully it works out all okay. But having done 5,933 damage and not wanting to ruin any more of his game from being sat in the back of the map, it's time to full send, and you're seeing it with him going into the opponent's left alive on the enemy team over in this kind of western side of the map. Now at this point no one has been spotted, which is actually fairly surprising, or at least no one spotted him, but that could all change very quickly as he moves over the ridgeline over here where the STB was last spotted. Now we don't know if maybe he didn't actually get spotted or he's moved entirely because the ridge wasn't fully crested, and of course bushes in water tanks are something else, but yeah, definitely something that you have to be aware of when deciding what your next play is. So he's moved into this area, he's obviously pinging in chat, I don't have view range, someone help. Something that you should always do. If you need help in water tanks, use the chat feature. It's usually only used when someone gets taken out and is a bit salty and triggered, but I'm not surprised. It is a game where it's definitely easy to get triggered. So with very little happening, the cautious approach of our player here, Eamon, is is obviously warranted. You don't want to be pushing into an FE 4005 anytime soon, especially if he can manage to catch the side of your tank, which can definitely be penned by the FE. And so yeah, it's very much a case of take it slow, see what happens, and discover how you're going to deal with the game as it goes. So in this sort of scenario where the enemy team have just basically disappeared back into their own spawn, as you know World of Tanks teams typically do, then you've got to be mindful of the various options that the enemy team have been taking. So at this point, it's just a case of trying to spot for his friendly team, and it appears like the majority of the team have actually moved back into the base because they would have been spotted moving forward into the town area by the E75 or potentially the Leopard PTA who is down in the ditch. Of course, the Charfew 2, the first tank in ages, has been spotted, and it is a tank that is very nice and juicy to be able to mop up the damage, slurp it up with the bobject. Now, of course, the aim time of this tank is not bad at all, and when you can smack in another round that sets someone on fire, it's almost like this tank is just the fire, the arsonist. So, having fapped on the Charfew 2, it's time to now focus on the STB-1, who has moved up into the town area. Unfortunately for him, he's been spotted, and it is going to be the curtains for him. But of course, there is still the most dangerous tank destroyer on the enemy team left alive, the FE 4005, and it's not just one of them either. The CC gets spotted here as well, and then the T95 is sat in a bush literally 50 meters in front of him, and so he gets shut down pretty quickly and in a hurry by the friendly artillery piece, which is always nice, the M53-55. And with the CC, the Italian tank destroyer, he does get indeed taken out pretty quickly as well, and the hit points seem to disappear when playing in the bobject, or at least playing against the bobject. The FV does indeed actually move forward, and you can see him getting into position here, but with a nicely aimed shot into the turret of him, that's pretty much it. Now, not very many tanks in the game would be able to take a direct impact hit from the FV and only take 100 damage, but it's something that the bobject does very well. Now, he does decide to ram the... Can't believe he actually rammed the FV 4005 and did so much damage, and especially when you're loading the HE rounds, it just finalises the damaging hit. So the bobject emerges on a brand new map and a whole new set of opponents to dominate against. And of course, we're going to be playing on Siegfried Line here and seeing how well this vehicle can cope with some of the other vehicles that you'll be meeting in this thing, primarily medium and light tanks. So, using the early mobility of the tank, you can get into positions that many medium and light tanks will take advantage of as well, so you are able to do exactly that. And so you can get into positions like this hill area at the beginning of the game, which I can sometimes typically use in this bush, and of course if you've got the spotting mechanics, you can also make sure that you remain undetected when getting into this bush. Now the Leopard 1 on the enemy team unfortunately gets taken out pretty much from full health, and there's no damage that you're going to be seeing really. Unfortunately, the EBR 105, as with the typical light-wheeled vehicles, they're just a pain in the arse to actually pen because they're all tracks and no body, and unfortunately, there's no damage for the object. As in the previous game, the bobject gets bored and it's time for the aggressive playstyle to come out once again, moving forward into a more advanced position. Of course, we all know what it's typically like on Siegfried Line, where the enemies like the E50M like to go down into this dip to be able to get some side shots on a lot of the opponents. Unfortunately, for the enemy team, they don't manage to pen successfully the bobject frontally, and unfortunately for them now, they're in a bit of a pickle because they've got to poke against a tank that will tear 650 alpha damage holes in them very easily, and basically can be one of the most annoying to be able to reliably pen because of the armor shape, the angling, and of course the amount of armor it has frontally. Now unfortunately it doesn't manage to pen that last shot, but it's time to now reverse back and try and avoid some of these shells. Unfortunately, because of the slope of the ground there, he does decide to actually end up giving away the lower plate of this vehicle to the 60 TP, which is the reason why he was able to bounce. Now unfortunately, you're seeing the track come off here, but because of the reload and because of the movement that we're seeing here from him in the bobject, the 60 TP is just having a tough time, like generally being able to deal with the bobject. And you can see here, if you're just constantly wiggling, it's a pain in the backside, beyond a pain in the backside even. So yeah, you can deal with a lot of the opponents that you face, but they can find it a difficult time to deal with you. So that's kind of how the bobject typically works, and you'll see that in pretty much 99% of games. I'm sure if you've ever played it yourself, you know exactly what I mean by struggling to actually play against it, whilst being able to easily pen pretty much everything that you play against, other than another bobject. For example, you're seeing here the enemy team getting a little bit too aggressive and pushing out in front of him, and that's what's been the bane of the enemy team's existence at this point, is that every single time they poke they take a 650, and unfortunately for them, but fortunately for the player here, he is able to dish out damage every single time. So this is how the bobject typically plays. This is why people hate it in World of Tanks, and the fact it was released as it has so much frontal armor. It's kind of like a Jaegeru, but with no real weak lower plate, to be honest, and it also gets a far more consistent gun. So with the Progetto now closing in from behind, he's got to turn around, and unfortunately for the bobject, it is not one of the strong suits to be able to turn around. Unfortunately for the Progetto though, because of the anticipation and being able to know that the Progetto was going to be moving, he is able to kind of poke against him and get a nice early damage shell into him. Progetto then takes a second one with 1300 damage done already onto him, and now it's pretty much curtains for him. The object can just basically poke him, deal that last shot of damage on him, and it's going to be game over. Unfortunately for the Progetto, he doesn't take the good exit route, which would have been to just move down behind the Leopard 1, and instead he decides to go straight out in front of him and try and run away directly straight away from him. But unfortunately for him, it doesn't work, and of course the Leopard 1 makes the exact same mistake of trying to poke against an object 268 version 4, and it doesn't work at all. The Minotauro then in a similar predicament. Unfortunately for the bobject though, the Minotaur actually does run away in a sensible position, and he is someone else's food. So in this game, 6,700 damage has been done with over 3,300 damage blocked. And will that increase in this next shot from the enemy 60 TP, or will it be curtains for the bobject? You're about to see. Of course, the 60 TP does low roll, and with this last shell, can he pen the 60 TP? Yes, of course he can. It is one of these predicaments now, once again, where the 60 TP has to be able to deal now with the hull armor and try and hit into that upper plate, or not the upper plate, but the cupola of this vehicle, which is very difficult, especially if you're aiming from below it. Can be a little bit of a pain, especially if this is wiggling side to side at the same time. Now the FV4005, now moving forward towards him, does derp the shell into the building, which is very unfortunate for him, but very fortunate for the bobject, because now it's time to use what the bobject is worth. And it is, of course, ramming, and 300 damage dealt in that singular ram there, which is fantastic for a tank that genuinely wasn't really, you wouldn't have thought would be a ramming boy, but because of the speed and the weight of it, it is able to ram things, and that's why you've seen so many clips in many people's videos, things like Iukshin's videos, Kaizu's videos, looking at the bobject. The ramming potential is just amazing, and it's so much fun to actually have a look at when they do manage to get it up at top speed, ramming into mediums and light tanks. And of course, even some of the more heavier tanks in the game, this thing can dominate as well. So thank you very much for watching. Of course, let me know your thoughts on the bobject 268 version 4, and of course let me know if you want to see any other videos on the channel specifically to do with World of Tanks at tier 10. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you join me in the next one. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, or I will be firing only premium at you.